evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It is September 8th, 2024. I'm your host, Nate Pike. Oh my gosh, we have so much to talk about. This was another weird one because we have so much that we want to cover, and there's some fun stuff, and there's some not fun stuff, and there's some horrible stuff, and we actually had to cut some things out. So if you're listening to the show, you would. I know there's a lot of people who don't like the Twitter machine anymore, but if you want to read all of the things that we've been sharing this week from the DMs, I strongly encourage you to go check out our Twitter feed or our Instagram feed because we post all of the things there. And there's just been so much this week. But we're going to try to cover the big ones, as well as ask some important questions about the nature of the conversations that our politicians have with each other, if you will. But to get started right out of the gates, we got to give a shout out to the good folks at the Western Standard, who, if you go to their website, they're very proud to say that the Western Standard proudly refuses to accept any government funding whatsoever. Our readers know this, and it is important building a trustable brand with a large readership across Western Canada. Super important to the folks at the Western Standard that everybody knows that they don't take any government money, not a penny, unless, of course, you look at the pinned tweet on our timeline or you go through our back catalog and look for our episode from May on the Western Standard, where we pointed out that, in fact, the Western Standard does take money from the provincial government, at the very least, in a variety of different ways. We started going down that rabbit hole because the Western Standard had a sole sourced contract. For anyone who's unfamiliar with a sole sourced contract, what that means is the government takes a look at the services that a particular vendor offers and says, oh, nobody else can do it quite like them. So we're just gonna give them the money. No competition, no RFP or request for proposal. We're just giving all the money to that guy. It's a favorite pathway that this government likes to use, especially when it comes to making some of their friends receive very healthy paydays, whether we're talking about people like Dave Yeager, who's been on a couple of panels for Danielle Smith. He's made a good chunk of money, or whether we're talking about the Western Standard. Now, the contract that was initially posted on the website that anyone can go to and see what the sole source contracts are was a little vague. It just said media library. That doesn't say very much. So we did a FOIP back then. And what it came up with is that the Western Standard was given $17,500 starting as of May 1st, 2023. And it was to feed all of the Western Standard's let's go with content into something called the CPE News Services Aggregator. The CPE aggregates news content from more than 160 commercial media outlets, including 106 Alberta newspapers, 39 broadcast channels, 4 national or out-of-province newspapers, pays for up to 90 days of copyright access, and the right to make all content available across the government. So basically what the CPE aggregator does is it takes in all of the news and it gives it to everyone in the government, and the government can publish it to government. But that seemed weird, so we actually FOIP'd the specifics of the contract back then. And the 2 points that were particularly interesting were numbers 4 and 6, because it turns out that the Western Standard, who absolutely doesn't take government money, did. And not only was it to feed their content into the CPE aggregator, it also allowed a non-exclusive license to share the materials with 600 users. And where it got really interesting was the contractor shall provide up to 100 memberships or accounts for Government of Alberta employees using a gov.ab.ca mailing address to enable viewing on Western Standard online. That's the very rushed version of the story so far with the Western Standard and the sole sourced contracts up until just recently, because another sole source contract popped up, and it looks like not only is the Western Standard getting paid, they're getting paid more than they got paid last time around. Not a lot. The contract has gone up. Now, before the reason was media library content. Now the reason is Western Standard New Media Corp. And you have to wonder if it's supposed to be news, but then maybe you don't. This new contract is for $19,992. It was issued on June 21st, 2024, and covers another year. So the odds are very good. The odds are high. It's probable. It's likely that this is just a re-up of that contract. They couldn't handle the month between middle of May and end of June, where they couldn't get access to the Western Standards content, because it's not like there's anything else that happened in and around June that might cause certain folks within the Western Standard to need some extra funds for like legal fees or anything like that. Nothing that we can think of that's supposed to have a court date later on this month. Nope. Just a mystery. Probably just the media services. But speaking of the sole source contracts, and moving on from there, we got to talk about the Canadian Energy Center, the War Room. No, that's not the right logo. We got to talk about the Canadian Energy Center. No, that's also not the right War Room. We got to talk about the Canadian Energy. No, that's Bean. That's a very inside baseball. That's a very inside baseball joke for those who have been following the War Room saga. We anchored our lead on that one. That's another very inside baseball joke. Anyways, as we talked about last week, the Canadian Energy Center has died but not. So the Canadian Energy Center website remains up. Its staffing list remains up. And as we talked about last week, there are 3 people who are doing very, very well in regards to continuing their careers with the Canadian Energy Center. Cody Siona, sorry if I'm saying your last name wrong there, Cody. He's got a sole source contract for $111,600. Steve Rennick, why is that name familiar? Steve Rennick got $425,568 for his contract, and Uremco Energy Consulting Limited got also $425,568. And we were trying to figure out why some of those names were familiar when we first saw that sole source contract get released. And it turns out those are the only 3 listed employees for the Canadian Energy Center. Danielle Smith made a big thing about how she was going to be canceling the Canadian Energy Center. It's been an embarrassment. They haven't done any good work. We need to get rid of the Canadian Energy Center and bring it into her office. So she very, very clearly brought in those 3 employees at the better part, almost $1 million. She's paying to continue the good work of the Canadian Energy Center, but one of those names was familiar, and somebody sent us a little nudge. They were like, "Hey, it's not just the War Room, guys." And it turns out that if you go back to 2015, we've got Danielle Smith, we got the Jim Prentice on the screen here. They're smiling, they're happy because it's fun to destroy an entire political party, I guess. But the story comes how 2 former Wildrose staffers were joining the Alberta Premier's office. Despite implementing a government-wide hiring freeze last month, Premier Jim Prentice, again, this article's from January 7th, 2015, has hired 2 former employees of the Wildrose opposition to work in his office. His spokeswoman confirmed Wednesday. Steve Rennick, the former chief of staff to the Wildrose caucus. So it turns out that Steve Rennick not only goes back to the War Room days, he goes back to the Wildrose War Room days and is now getting $500,000 in sole source contracts from Danielle Smith. So that's fun, right? Moving on from there. Some news about some election-y, not really, but kind of stuff. There's a by-election that's coming up. So one of the things that has come up in the last couple of months was NDP MLA Shannon Phillips resigned from office as MLA. Now, you just have to Google her name. There's so many good reasons why Shannon Phillips would want to leave the public eye, would want to leave public office, because she was literally targeted by the Lethbridge police. So that's not cool. So she said, "Hey, you know what? Now's a good time. I'm gonna step back, do some things with the family, maybe do some policy work. Who knows? She's doing some policy work." But that opened up a by-election, and the by-election is we don't have a date for it yet, but we do have one candidate, Rob Miyashiro, who was a former city councilor, town councilor. I think it's a city, Lethbridge. I'll probably get a comment for that one. Former city councilor has won the nomination to be the NDP candidate, and there's a lot going on in this graphic that's really quite interesting. In particular, we got the new Team Nenshi graphic going on. And there's a lot to unpack in this. We got a color scheme. We got the Alberta is the N, and we got the mountains of a very particular color. So a glimpse into the new branding of the NDP under Head Nenshi's leadership. But don't worry, UCP, you're not left out. You're just a little bit slower. The UCP is going to be having a nomination vote on, drumroll please, September 23rd. So just a couple of weeks. The UCP's Lethbridge West candidates are Eric Leclerc, a former constituency officer manager for both Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Newdorf and Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas. The next candidate is John Middleton Hope, a former police officer and Lethbridge police chief. And Shauna Gruninger, a Lethbridge real estate agent. Cool, right? That's cool. September 23rd. Like I said, we don't have a date set for the by-election yet, but you can bet that it won't come before Danielle Smith's leadership review, and we are absolutely going to be talking about that later on as well. Moving on from there, one of the items that made the news in a continuing big way, it's good because these are all issues that we need to be talking about, and we certainly need to be holding MLAs and elected officials to account for, have to do with Danielle Smith's policies. She's announced a suite of anti dignity, anti-human rights, anti-parental choice. They're all very bad. They're very bad policies. And one of those policies, we've talked about them at length. They're going to keep talking about them because it's gross that we live in a province that is rolling back and attacking human rights. As I've said before on the show, an attack on the human rights of any of us is an attack on the human rights of all of us. But Education Minister Dimitrios Nicolaides, in a statement, said school boards, teachers, superintendents, and parents are being consulted in regards to the new opt-in requirement for sex ed. So this is stupid, but we'll walk through it. The decision Danielle Smith has made for reasons is that if you have kids in school and your kids are going to a school that's going to teach the sexual education curriculum, then if you want your kids to learn about sex ed stuff, you have to sign a form saying, I would like my kids to learn about this. Currently, the way that it works is if you don't want your kids to learn about those things, you absolutely have that choice. You can sign a little form that every parent gets at the beginning of the year, and you can say, oh, I don't want my kids to learn about sex ed. And so I would like them to not go to these classes, please. You can do that. Instead, and some parents do, most parents don't. Most parents do want their kids to learn about the sex ed things because it's an uncomfortable topic. And if I can get my kids to learn from another person, maybe that works better for me. That's an option that exists. But the way that the option is changing is going forward. If you want your kids to be part of that course, then you have to send the form back saying, yes, I would like my kids to be a part of the sex ed program. Now, this is another one of those weird little limbo things that Smith announced like 10 months ago, almost. She announced it back in January as part of her timeshare commercial from hell. But the details, the specifics, the exact legislation, the exact regulations haven't actually been released yet. So from the story on the screen, it's not clear what the legislation might look like, but Premier Danielle Smith said in February it would involve parents opting in their children to each formal lesson on sexual health. And this is where we are going to talk about one of the DMs that we got, because it's uncomfortable and it's awkward and it's not going to leave anybody feeling great, but not for any of the reasons that you're probably thinking. Can post confidential. This is what we were sent. One of the many problems with the new proposed sex ed rules is it will disproportionately impact Indigenous students. There's significant effort put into collecting forms each year from Indigenous families. It requires a lot of trust to be built. The reason is that many families with generational trauma from residential schools are very reluctant to sign any forms from schools. Previously, if the parents didn't send in the form, their kid would still get an education. Now, nope. So an already at-risk community will become more at risk. And it's true. The number of comments and additional DMs that we got in response to that said, yeah, there is a healthy distrust of all of the things because of, well, Canada and the relationship that Canada has had with Indigenous peoples. Oh, we still do. There's a horrifying story that came out of Wetaskiwin this week, and you'd better believe that we're going to be reading the ACERT notes when they're finally released. But there's a lot of reasons for Indigenous families to have distrust in the education system. But that doesn't mean that it's in the kids' best interest to not learn these things. Because some of the things that kids learn in sex ed programs is how to identify, stay away from, and keep safe from sexual predators. Kids learn about important issues like consent. They learn about important issues like sexual health, how to recognize when there's a problem. We live in a province where there's a syphilis in stunning numbers. And one of the most effective ways to combat the spread of STIs is to make sure that people know the things. And this decision doesn't change whether or not parents have the right to say, hey, you know what? I do not want my kid to learn about sexual predators, consent, sexual health, or sexually transmitted infections. I don't want my kids to know about those things. Let them learn the hard way. If that's what a parent wants to do, a parent has the right under the current system to do that. But we're changing it now so that if a parent wants to go, hey, you know what? The Alberta curriculum, such as it is good in many ways. I want my kids to learn about all of the things. I don't want to be selective. I just want my kids to go to school and learn all the things. Now, for a parent to do that, there's additional forms that they have to fill out, or there's going to be additional forms that they'll have to fill out. And then there's the whole added administrative burden for teachers of collecting those forms. And if you didn't get a form, making sure that it's for the right reasons and making sure that the parents understand the forms. Because I'll be honest with you, some of the forms that I had to fill out for my kids this year and going back to school, it's a very good thing that my wife checked my work, because I missed a couple of really important things. Mistakes happen. And the cost of those mistakes should be a child's ability to access things like basics of sexual health and reproduction. Moving on from there. We talked about her last week. We're talking about her this week. That's right. It's time for poop cookies, because we're talking about Jennifer Johnson again. So some of you will remember last week we talked about one of the questions that Danielle Smith was asked at a town hall. Well, another video surfaced of a recent town hall that she did in Red Deer. And her answer was even more clear about what the plans are for Jennifer Johnson.
I went to Lacombe Pinoca, and she was very gracious and introduced me. I can tell you she is taking her job as MLA and representative very seriously. She shows up in the legislature, she asks good questions, she participates in estimates, she debates bills, and she's doing the work of building confidence in the community and building some of those relationships in the community. We want to have the legislation around protecting children come forward. Give her a chance to speak to it and put on the record what she really meant and what she really said and how she really feels, and to have her have that forum to do that. And then we'll gauge whether or not that has done enough to make the amendment with her constituents at that point. But I think she doesn't want this whole debate to be about her comments during the election. I think she wants it to be about us passing policy. And we need to pass that policy. It's important to protect the kids. So let's get through the fall, and then ask me again when I come back here. Thank you.
So once again, that policy is not important to protect the kids. It's going to hurt the kids. Period. End of sentence. This is the policy that is attacking human rights. This is the policy that inserts Danielle Smith into doctors' offices across the province. And this is the policy that is punching down on some of the most vulnerable youth and taking away the ability of parents to make decisions for their kids. That's the policy that we really need to pass to protect the kids, says Danielle Smith. But she makes it very clear. She wants Jennifer Johnson. She wants her to clarify her comments, to go on the record, as if there's not already an extensive record of what her comments were. Danielle Smith makes it very, very clear in this clip. There's really only one reason why she's waiting until after the policies go through to bring Jennifer Johnson in, is because if she brings Jennifer Johnson into caucus now, then everybody's going to go, wait, you brought the transphobic comment-making person into caucus, and then you brought out the transphobic policies. Hey, maybe one of these things is related. But the reality is, those two things don't need to be related. Jennifer Johnson made horrifying transphobic comments. No question. Danielle Smith is working to bring in horrifying transphobic policies. Also, no question. But the fact that Danielle Smith seems to think that she's playing some sort of political Connect Four, I don't even think it's checkers, with the when we're going to bring Jennifer Johnson into caucus, even though she very clearly is also on record saying, never going to happen. It goes to what is going to be one of the larger themes of this particular episode. Because one of the themes that we wanted to explore a little bit tonight is the idea of good faith versus bad faith. How do you know when someone's dealing in good faith? How do you know when someone's dealing in bad faith? And in order to have that greater conversation, you have to look at what a person said and done. So before we move off of Jennifer Johnson, yeah, we shared this last week. Yeah, we're going to share it again because we know that the comments from Jennifer Johnson weren't a one-off. They weren't a random little thing. She punched down on people suffering with mental health and addiction when she said, so if a kid has an allergic reaction, the parents have to pay a ridiculous price for an EpiPen, but a junkie who has OD'd for the 15th time gets Narcan for free. Don't you see that they're just not worth it at a certain point, according to, apparently, Jennifer Johnson. On February 27th, 2018. So this is, by the way, before the pandemic. A lot of people, us included, have said, hey, you know what? A lot of people didn't cope with the pandemic super well. Some people were radicalized by it. There's no question about that. Some people came radicalized before it. Jennifer Johnson, we look back in shame at the crimes against humanity in Hitler's Germany. Why don't we look back in shame where we are right now with abortion and infanticized, normalized, and glorified in America in 2018? She's got the gingerbread house with the NRA, the American flag, and God bless America. And then during the pandemic, December 4th, 2021, she shared an article where she said, just a couple of months ago, this was dismissed as conspiracy theory, yet we're seeing it play out in real time. Hashtag stand stom, hashtag freedom. So how do you how are you liking authoritarian capitalism so far? I wonder if we will wake up and wonder if this will wake up the unvaxxed or maybe they want poison on a drip. It'd be so much easier. And then shares an article where Germany was allegedly locking down unvaccinated people. That's who Jennifer Johnson is. She's shown us who she is. And when somebody has a repeated pattern of behavior going over years, that's maybe where you have to take a step back and say, I think maybe this is a pattern of behavior. And certainly, there's no shortage of pride organizers and activists for the LGBTQ2S plus community in her constituency who have said, yeah, we still haven't heard from her like she said she was going to. So knowing who is dealing in good faith and bad faith gets to be really, really important. And that brings us to, we're really proud of this graphic, the green line. You see what's happening here is it's a green line and it's crashing because that's what happened in Calgary this week. So let's take a sec to talk about the green line situation. And I'm going to do a shout out here. I don't know if they'll like it or not, but there's a crew in Calgary here. There's a gentleman named Jeremy Clauses, and he runs a podcast called The Sprawl. Mr. Clauses did a excellent podcast episode. I don't know what he calls them. It's kind of pop up. It's really awesome, but he does really, really, really good deep dives on things. And he just recently did a deep dive on the Green Line. So if you're wanting to make sense of the whole Green Line debacle at a deeper level than what we're going to try to do tonight, you should definitely check out the Sprawl's latest episode because it's so good. Plus, they have comics, and that's awesome for simple people like me. But let's talk about the Green Line. So the Green Line has been part of an expansion of the LRT or the transit train in Calgary for quite some time. And it's undergone quite a bit of an evolution. We've got a map up on the screen here where we're showing sort of how it started, how it's going now. So originally, the Green Line was supposed to run from North Point in North Calgary. That's in the north central area of Calgary. I have a little bias on that one. And connect that whole central corridor down to the downtown core. It was then supposed to continue heading south all the way down to Seton. For a variety of reasons, there was some shrinkage that had to occur. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. The initial cost estimate for the Green Line was $4.65 billion. It was going to be split between the municipal, provincial, and federal governments. In 2020, after City Hall reevaluated the project, see, there's been this thing that happens with the Green Line is that it gets reevaluated like every couple of years, and it takes a lot of time to do that reevaluation. And maybe the plans change a little bit, maybe they don't change at all. But every time there's a reevaluation, every time that there's a delay, the work takes longer and it costs more because inflation. $4.65 billion is not worth today what it was in 2016, 2017. So because of that, including when in 2021, the UCP, Rick McIver, said, we're gonna pause construction because we want to do a review of the project. There were some additional changes that were made to the map, and it got quite a bit smaller. And what the Green Line in the current up until the beginning of the week iteration looked like was a train that was starting at Eau Claire and running down to Linwood Milliken area. Now, you don't have to look too closely at the maps to see that's a pretty radical change in size. But the trick of it is you have to take in context the fact that the cost overruns have happened because of consistent delays, whether we're talking about the UCP meddling with it and saying, we're going to do a review and come up with the exact same conclusions that you guys did. But look, we did another review and delayed things for a while. Or if we're talking about COVID or. The map that I just showed you is the map from July of 2024, City Council approving that map. And the cost for that 10 kilometers of track was $6.248 billion. Now, the city said, inflation, man, cost of living in Alberta. Everybody knows what it's like. Am I right? And they're not wrong. And critics said, well, we thought we were going to get the train all the way down to Seaton. I mean, when the project was initially proposed, it was supposed to go all the way across the north and the south of the city. And now we're getting, what, 10 kilometers? That's not great. And you're not wrong to have that initial reaction because, yeah, that's not great. But one of the things that you have to keep in mind is this is the center of the project. And once you get that center through the downtown, because that's the hardest part, dealt with, then you can build incrementally the rest of the way. It's suboptimal. There's no question. I don't think anyone's debating that the whole situation around the Green Line has been suboptimal for the last bunch of years anyways. But the project, as it was, as we just showed you on that map, was supposed to go ahead. Like I said, July, City Council approved the smaller version to at least get the spine of the project built. And that it's important to highlight that while all of this has been going on, it's not like nothing's been going on as well. The city's actually spent a significant amount of money to date in order to make sure that the project moves ahead. The cost to date, whether we're talking about owner's costs, design and engineering, construction land and other assets, bus rapid transit, the cost to date is $1,259,177,495. That's how much money has been spent. It's gone. It's been, well, I should say gone, but it's been put towards making sure that the infrastructure exists. And there's a Calgary journalist who did a really good deep dive just on the social media machine a little while ago, where he took a look at all of the different infrastructure pieces that have been put into place. The Eau Claire section and the closing of Eau Claire Market. He took pictures in Ramsey, where there's been demolition to make space for. He had a picture of the empty lot in Ramsey, the former site of the Shamrock Hotel, which has happy memories for me. I know a lot of people didn't like the Shamrock, but I used to play there all the time, and it was an absolutely wonderful music venue. I miss it. It burned down, but the city has cleared that whole lot in preparation for the Green Line. When the Glenmore Overpass was done, they made sure that there was space for the LRT. I didn't know about this. There's a 100-meter tunnel that was built under an existing CN rail line to make it easier and quicker for construction crews to build the Green Line through the area. So there's lots of ways that it's not like when you say, oh, $1.26 billion was spent. Well, yeah, but it was spent on things that are needed. So that's not nothing. And it's also worth highlighting that when we're talking about the Green Line, it was a joint project. And it was, despite the cost overruns, there was discussion between the city and the province and the feds about, hey, we got to make this project happen. Because the reality is, public transit does a lot of really important things for a city. People who don't have access to vehicles are able to get around the city. They're able to get to appointments. They're able to get to school. Talk to anybody who's lived in North Central Calgary for any amount of time, and they'll tell you how frustrating it is that their kids have to wait on buses, often 4 hours of their day, just to get to school and to get back. So having effective public transit is really an important piece of having a functional city. And it was a project that at the beginning of August, Devin Dreeshen and the UCP voiced their full-throated support of.
Start things off, that $1.5 billion committed for the project from the province, is that money still completely secure?
You bet, 100%. And I've been working closely with the mayor and Calgary city councillors so that they knew that $1.53 billion commitment from the province for the Green Line was in place, and that it is secure and that they can bank on it.
It's in place. It's secure. You can bank on it. This was after the city had already said, hey, we're going to have to change things up a little bit because it turns out that things got more expensive while we were trying to get this project done, which happens. So the province was fully aware of the reduced scope of the Green Line. Devin Dreeshen, you heard in that clip, said, it's in the bank. It's in place. Count on it. 100%. Shields up. But then we get to September 3rd, because on September 3rd, Devin Dreeshen sent a letter to the mayor of Calgary. We got a copy. There was a lot of people who were pissed off that we got a copy of the letter, but we got a copy of the letter, and he made it clear that the province was pulling the money. As a provincial government, we have an obligation to ensure taxpayer dollars for infrastructure are allocated efficiently and in a manner that will benefit the largest amount of Albertans possible. The Green Line is fast becoming a multi-billion-dollar, and in a professional letter, he uses the word boondoggle because this was not political at all. That will serve very few Calgarians. This is unacceptable, and our government is unable to support or provide funding for this Green Line Stage 1 scope as presented in the city's most recent business case. So, Devin Dreeshen stood up on the media and he said, no, 100%, bank on it. And then he waited 3 weeks and sent an email saying, we will not throw good money after bad. Unless, I guess, it's like Turkish Tylenol, Tylenol. Then we'll throw good money after bad. Hey, was Devin Dreeshen in cabinet? Was he part of the UCP government? Was he an elected official during the Jason Kenney's giant pipeline to nowhere? Yes, I believe he was. So for Devin Dreeshen to say, hey, look, guys, I know I promised one thing and very publicly committed to it 100%. It turns out I actually have an extra 2%. So when I say 100%, there's a little bit of latitude. I can go all the way up to 102%. And it's that 2% you didn't count on, kids, because we're taking our money and running. And this is now where we are at, because the Green Line is now being effectively shut down. The city of Calgary has instructed city administration to look at how do we shut this whole project down, which means that because Devin Dreeshen decided, apparently while Danielle Smith was on vacation, that he was going to destroy one of the largest infrastructure projects in Alberta's history in order to take a cheap shot at Nenshi. That whole project and the $1.2 billion that has been invested in making sure that everything is in place, that the properties are purchased and the buildings are knocked down and all of the things, that is just going to, I don't know, go to the highest, maybe lowest bidder. Hard to say these days. Now, a lot of people are going, why? Why would Devin Dreeshen do this? And the answers are both complicated and surprisingly simple. The city councilor has speculated that there is an individual, let's call him Jim Gray, who is the head of an organization that maybe does property development, maybe in Seton. I don't know. I'm just paraphrasing what the city councilor said. And the value of that development only goes up if the Green Line goes all the way down there. So there's a lot of people have said maybe Jim Gray, who is, by the way, a massive donor to the Conservatives, has been for years and has continued to be also a significant donor to third-party advertisers that try to influence the outcomes of municipal elections, including Alberta Proud, which participated in the last municipal election, which is weird because it's Alberta. It's all very hard to keep track of. But Mr. Gray, he's got money to throw around, and he's happy to throw it around. So there's a lot of speculation. Maybe the reason why Danielle Smith allowed Mr. Dreeshen to have his bizarre boondoggle of a temper tantrum is because Jim Gray really, really, really would like some rails to get all the way down to Seaton, no matter what has to change. Maybe we can just use some paper mache and figure it all out. Because that way Seaton gets to say, hey, look, we got the train. Houses just went up. There's also not even speculation that a lot of this has to do with the fact that Danielle Smith and the UCP were never really big fans of the Green Line the way that the city proposed it, the way that the city planned it. It's also worth noting that before Danielle Smith, neither was, for this reason, the UCP. Because there's this family out in the Banff area, and they got their own little developmental thing that they want to do. And in particular, they would love to see a train go from Calgary to Banff. It's worth remembering that the UCP under Jason Kenney, Prasad Panda, he took a look at the whole project and he said, there's no business case here. There's no reason for the province to put the money into this. And they dismissed it. But now all of a sudden, now that Danny is back, not in any way to suggest that this government's for sale. Cough, skybox, cough. But now all of a sudden that project's back on the table. And Danielle Smith's vision for rail includes a grand central station in downtown Calgary where all of her little projects will come together. She can get her train to the airport and she can get her train to Banff, and Mr. Gray can get his train down to Seaton. But that only happens if the city bends the knee to the province and does exactly what the province wants, exactly how the province wants, exactly the way the province wants it done. And this is where it's kind of shocking because, quite frankly, Danielle Smith and the UCP, particularly Danielle Smith's UCP, have demonstrated that they absolutely believe that the only reason why municipalities exist is by the UCP's, the province's good graces. They exist as a byproduct of the province. And yes, that's technically true, but anyone who knows anything about management knows that sometimes you have to delegate roles so that you can do the things that are most related to you. And so delegating the roles and responsibilities of running a city or a town or a village or makes perfect sense. But Danielle, this is my jurisdiction, Smith, can't seem to see the forest for the trees on that one. And she has done it to different cities and different orders of government time and time again, where she gets it in her head that this is her space and she gets absolute say over what happens here. So it's stunning. The biggest thing that surprises me about this whole Green Line shit show is that anybody thought that the province of Alberta under Danielle Smith was dealing with this project in good faith. Danielle Smith got what she needed out of this current city council. She got her arena deal. And it's not a surprise that she pushed as hard as she did for the arena deal, given her history with some of the owners and their affiliations with her former employers. But she got what she needed from the city of Calgary. The only question I have in regards to the whole Green Line debacle is how long does Danielle Smith decide she's going to allow the current iteration of the City of Calgary Council to continue doing their jobs, to continue being a council? Would anybody legitimately be surprised if in 2 or 3 weeks we heard Danielle Smith step in front of a microphone and say, hey, you know what, everybody? Oh, Calgary, I love you so much. You're just the bestest city. You elected some of my MLAs. I really do appreciate that. Yeah, I can't believe this municipal government that you have to deal with. Like, they can't even keep the water going. They had to put water restrictions in. There's wooden pipes in the province in Calgary. In 2024, there's wooden pipes. They're not doing their jobs at all. I'm going to do exactly what I did with Alberta Health Services. I'm going to disband City Council in Calgary, and I'm going to put in my new chief administrator, and his name's maybe going to be, I don't know, maybe Jim Gray. I don't know. And he's going to run the show to make sure that everything works the way that it's supposed to after the water pipes problem has already been fixed. Would you be surprised if that was something that we saw from this government? Because I got to tell you, I wouldn't be. Because if there's one thing Danielle Smith has demonstrated time and time again, she does not deal with Albertans in good faith, which brings us to our last topic for the evening. And this is going to be complicated. This is a hell of a needle that we have put in front of ourselves to try and thread, because it's complicated. And there's a lot of strong feelings that exist around this particular topic. So we're going to try to deal with this in a just the facts kind of way. And if you're only listening to a small clip of this, please go back and listen to the whole thing, because there's a lot of nuance in this conversation. And we are talking now about halal financing. Now, there's a lot to unpack in halal financing. And there's a lot to unpack, in particular, in regards to promises that Danielle Smith has made to the Muslim community in Alberta. In order to try to explore this, there's a couple of things that we need to do. The first thing that we need to do is we have a couple of terms that we need to nail down, because we're going to use two words, one of which has gotten to be really inflammatory to people who don't know what the words mean. So, what does halal mean? Halal means permissible. It means okay. And what it refers specifically to is something that is permissible under the law that exists in Islam. Now, the law that exists in Islam is called Sharia law. So, within Islamic discourse, Sharia refers to religious regulations governing the lives of Muslims. So when we're talking about halal, we're talking about something that is in line with the rules that exist for Muslims. That's all. It's like the Ten Commandments, kind of, sort of, in that there are rules that exist in all kinds of different religions that say to the adherents of that faith, here's what you should do if you're going to be Christian, Muslim, Hindu, flying spaghetti monster, whatever. Every faith has its own set of rules. And in Islam, those rules are called Sharia. Important to be clear on that. So when we're talking about halal mortgages, which is what we're talking about for the rest of the show, we're talking about an acceptable mortgage under Sharia law. Now, in the vast majority of interpretations, in order for a mortgage to be halal under Sharia law, there can be no interest paid. So you can't have a loan that has interest. You can't make interest. That is considered to be not halal. So the quick and easy way to get around that is, instead of paying interest on a mortgage, you pay fees. Now, it's also important to realize that when we're talking about halal mortgages, typically we're talking about mortgages where it's because they're governed by rules of faith, there are circumstances where, if there are problems with that agreement, those agreements get resolved within the spiritual leaders of that community. So unlike an agreement with a bank where repeated failed payments would lead to foreclosure, there's a mediation process that exists through the leaders of that faith group to resolve the issues. Hopefully, I'm not doing too badly so far. The other thing that's important to realize about halal mortgages is that there are certain types of investments that are forbidden for religious reasons, regardless of what their return on investment might be, because of religious principles. So there are certain areas that somebody who is following Sharia law and they are trying to make sure that their financial world is halal, there are certain areas where they just wouldn't invest because it would be a violation of their faith. That might mean that they might not invest in areas that they're going to see bigger return on investments, but that's okay with them. That's the choice that they're making as individuals, as adherents of their faith. So, one of the questions that we have to ask when we get towards the promises that Danielle Smith has made to Muslims in Alberta is, what exactly has she promised? And she made some really big promises in the run-up to the last provincial election.
Time to reflect upon the importance of discipline, devotion, humility, and sacrifice, and to reaffirm the bonds that draw communities together. And I appreciate you sharing your time with me during this special period. It is truly wonderful to be gathered this evening to celebrate in fellowship together. I have said for many years, and I found it interesting to hear the Imam talking about the foundation of your faith this evening, because I have talked about the foundation of conservatism being the individual, the family, the community, being built on freedom. After meeting and spending time with many of you, it is almost certainly true that these values are celebrated by Alberta Muslims as well. Now let's talk about something else I learned from my Muslim friends. The Islamic faith does not permit you to pay interest charges to a bank. But you are, I've learned a little bit about halal banking, you are permitted to pay banking service fees. I'm here to announce this evening to all of you that we are going to change our banking laws in Alberta to allow a financial institution to not only charge interest as they do now, but to introduce new service fee options that are in compliance with Muslim faith. This will reduce red tape, allow for a new banking product to bring more people into the financial market, further improving Alberta's economy. It's a win for Alberta's Muslims, and it's a win for Alberta's economy. I've also heard that it would be wonderful for you to have holidays that are recognized by your employers. I mean, they are called holidays because they are holy days, and we know that we recognize many in the Christian calendar, but every religion has a holy day, yours being Eid, that you would like to be able to have days off. I know that they do this in New York and in Maine, and so we are looking at how we would be able to create the legislation to allow that so that you can spend the day with your family.
Now, there's a lot to unpack here. There's a whole lot to unpack here, and we're going to try to do our best to try to unpack it. But it would be, especially given that we're in the month of September, it would be remiss of us to not point out the fact that when it comes to recognizing important days, as we approach September 30th, that the UCP doesn't have the greatest track record when it comes to acknowledging these things. Back in 2021, Alberta was very, very clear to Canada and to Indigenous folks and anybody who's invested in the ideas or principles of truth and reconciliation that Alberta would not enact legislation to recognize the federal Truth and Reconciliation holiday. And in fact, if we take a look at the holiday calendar that we pulled today off of the Government of Alberta website, there's general holidays. These are the ones you get paid for. These are the ones that the Alberta government has said, hey, you know what? If you would have been working on this day, you get paid for it. So we've got New Year's Day, Alberta Family Day, Good Friday, Victoria Day, Canada Day, Labor Day, Thanksgiving Day, Remembrance Day, Christmas Day. A lot of Judeo-Christian days on there, and then some historic ones. The optional general holidays are Easter Monday, Heritage Day, National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and Boxing Day. These are the ones where employers can choose to recognize those additional days as holidays, but they don't have to. Now, as we're going through that list there of holidays, you may notice that there's no mention of any of the important Muslim holidays. So Danielle Smith promised the Muslim community a year and a half ago that she was going to look at ways to make a holiday happen. And it turns out it's not that actually hard to make a holiday happen. You just like get the premier to write things down on a piece of paper and go, yeah, we're going to say that this day is going to be this day. And but it's done. It's not that difficult. But Danielle Smith has managed to not deliver on those promises that she made in a Muslim holy building, no less. For reasons, I guess. But she also talked about the halal financing piece. So the holiday piece, we're going to set that aside for now. We're going to get back to the halal financing piece, because when we start to talk about the halal financing piece, Danielle Smith not only delivered those speeches, she made a whole social media campaign out of it. With Alberta's innovative approach to enable halal mortgages, more people may be able to access mortgage lending services in this province. Canada's very first mosque was built in Alberta in 1938, and today we are announcing another first. Our province will establish additional banking options for our Muslim friends, making the dream of ownership a reality for so many more families. It's a win for Alberta's economy and a win for Alberta's Muslim community. That was April 12th of last year, 2023. Now, you might be asking the obvious question. If you have been following the show for a while, or if you know anything about this topic, which is pretty niche, so we'll just get to the point. Because the question has to be, is all these changes on Danielle Smith on April 12th of 2023, she sure seemed to suggest that you can't get a halal mortgage in Canada or Alberta, except you can. You actually can. And you have been able to since 2021. In December of 2021, the Canadian Halal Financial Corporation started working with the Al Rashid Mosque to provide halal mortgages. So the mechanisms for somebody to get a halal mortgage already exist. So to be clear, Danielle Smith promised to make halal mortgages available, even though they are already available and have been for years. So that seems lazy at the best interpretation. Hey, we're going to give you this thing that already happens. Hooray. It's worth noting that across Canada, there's multiple other organizations that provide halal mortgages. So we've been trying to figure out, and we've been talking to some people to try to figure out what changes could she be thinking about making? Has there been any work that's been done? Because the original announcement from the government of Alberta on April 12th, 2023, referenced the Alberta Regulatory Sandbox, which is a new set of exemptions for new businesses trying out a new product. It was going to be revolutionary. So many people are going to take advantage of this thing that lets people have exemptions from rules so they can figure out whether or not their financial thing works. And what's weird is, even though the government of Alberta website says that they're going to list everybody who's made use of it, we couldn't find anything. There's nobody who's been publicly listed who has made use of this sandbox. So whatever changes Danielle Smith and the UCP are looking at doing have nothing to do with the sandbox. But what's interesting, where things start to get a little bit more interesting, is Some comments that Nate Horner said, because on March 13th, 2024, in a committee meeting, Nate Horner said that the working group that he'd put together for halal mortgages was meeting up to 4 times a week. When it comes to the sandbox, I know that in conversations with my team very recently, we've been discussing the halal financial working group. They're progressing quite well. A very active group. I think the department met with them 4 times last week. That's how often they're meeting. I know the sandbox is there and it may need to be used in regard to the halal financing once the working group kind of lands it, just to make sure we get it right before we move to legislation. And then things were quiet for a little while. But on December 4th of the same year, Horner was asked again about it in the legislature. Question was, Treasury Board, tell the House if the government plans to implement the election commitment on halal financing in Alberta. Mr. Horner said, Mr. Speaker, thank you. That's a great question. That is obviously something that we're working on. It's taking quite a bit of time. It's obviously complicated, but we've reached out to the Muslim community. They're working with us in that regard to try to build this behind the scenes, something that could meet all of their needs. This is where it gets interesting. We're also working with the credit union system and conversations with ATB. Yeah. We're hopeful that in some reasonably near future, we'll be able to have some kind of a product that will meet everyone's needs. So, bunch of stuff to unpack in that piece alone. It's obviously complicated to provide the service that is already actively being provided by a company in Alberta that is already working with the Al Rashid Mosque to make sure that it remains halal. But boy, we just can't copy somebody else's notes. But it's the ATB piece and the credit unions piece that gets to be particularly interesting. This wasn't the only question he was asked about it. Mr. Speaker, we have a task force working, again, behind the scenes. Like I said, working with the credit union and other lending institutions to try to build this product. It's obviously complicated. If we could make it faster, we would. But I think it's important that you get it right before you consider bringing it forward in legislation. So we're trying to do that. There are complexities even within what different segments of the Muslim community need. So we're trying to work with all of the subjects to make sure we have something that works for everyone. Now, again, the product already exists. How do we know? We went to their website today. This is the website for the Canadian Halal Financial Corporation that has been working with the mosque in Edmonton to provide halal mortgages. So if there were legislative changes that need to be made, you have to kind of ask the question, what would be the legislative changes that would need to be made? And one of the things that we've been hearing about quite a bit about this secret committee that meets 4 times a week to bring in halal/Sharia mortgages using credit unions and ATB is that introducing mortgages in public institutions like Alberta Treasury Branch carries some complications. Like we said earlier, one of the ways that banks make their money is they use the money they make from people's investments to invest in growth areas. The primary responsibility of banks and credit unions is to make the most money that they can for their shareholders. And in the case of Alberta Treasury Branch, that's the taxpayers, because the ATB is a crown corporation that's wholly owned by Albertans. Like I said, we've spoken to a few people with inside knowledge of the UCP working group, and what they've told us is one of the possibilities that's being pursued is to direct ATB to provide halal mortgages in a firewalled silo that would provide that would ensure that no money tied up in the mortgages is invested in a way that would go against Sharia law, which would mean that ATB would be prioritizing some of its investments, not based on what gets Alberta taxpayers the best return, but rather what is in following with Sharia law. Now, again, no one is arguing that halal mortgages shouldn't be available because, again, they already are. The free market has addressed this space. The question that should be asked is, why did Danielle Smith and the UCP make promises that weren't necessary for halal mortgages to be a thing And why is Danielle Smith allegedly looking at taxpayer money to facilitate them? Now, we like to not deal too much in the realm of speculation over here at the breakdown. So we actually did try and do our due diligence to find out if we could get a real answer. We wanted to make sure that the government of Alberta had the opportunity to say, hey, no. That's not what we're doing here at all. No, we're not going to direct the ATB to use taxpayers' money to provide a service that's already being provided by the private sector. We're not doing that. That's ridiculous. So we actually emailed the press secretary for Nate Horner. We're very polite. Good evening, Justin. This was said on September 3rd, 2024. Today is September 8th, 5 days later. Good evening, Justin. Working on a segment for an upcoming show, and I was hoping you might be able to clarify something. Can you confirm if the task force on halal mortgages is exploring the possibility of providing halal mortgages through Alberta Treasury branches as a separate product? Thanks in advance. I thought, frankly, that we were I wrote that email. I felt really good about that email. I felt like it was upbeat. I felt like it was polite. I felt like it was professional. I didn't use the word boondoggle in there in a single space. We didn't get a reply. And if you take a look at the other inquiries that real journalists, not just well-informed commentary / satire podcasts, web series have done, the government is being extraordinarily secretive about it. And so it really kind of leaves one of two options that we can see. One of them is Danielle Smith, the UCP, are absolutely looking at making regulatory changes, maybe making legislative changes that will allow them to make regulatory changes so that they can use taxpayers' money to provide a service that is already being provided by the free market with the approval of the religious leaders of that group. So I don't even think there's an argument, speaking for myself, I don't even think that there's an argument to be made that, oh, this is some sort of predatory corporation. Because, again, the leadership at the Al Rashid Mosque is signing off on every single one of these agreements. One would think if there was some sort of predatory lending practice that was going on, the religious leaders would be the first to say, oh, that's not great. We're not gonna allow that. So what is Danielle Smith? That's one possibility. She's looking at making these legislative changes so she can make regulatory changes to duplicate a product that already exists at taxpayers' expense, because again, there are limited investment options once you go down the Sharia law pathway. The other option is that she was just lying to Muslims in order to get their votes. And I don't think that we have to look very far to see what Danielle Smith's true motivation was. Because the clips that we played at the beginning, we cut off the last half because we wanted particularly to end with the last half.
I am asking you to stand with me so that I may continue the good work that we've begun together. I am asking you to stand for our province and stand for all the communities that make this province an incredible place to live. This is the Alberta we love. Thank you to everyone for your genuine friendship. May you continue to have a blessed Ramadan, and I'm looking forward to breaking the fast together this evening.
Love the United Conservative branding at the end of that clip, but she says it right there. I'm asking you to vote for me so that I can continue to be the premier, so that I can give you the religious holidays, so that I can give you the Sharia law halal mortgages. And then a year and a half later, nothing. No holidays. No word on any regulatory changes. No word on any legislative changes. Danny got what she wanted. She got their votes. And then, as we have seen from this government, once they get what they want, they hang people out to dry. They did it to the city of Calgary. Sure looks like they've done it to the Muslim community. They are acting in bad faith. And one of the things that is critically important to understand, and one of the things that has made this debacle with the Green Line so hard to watch, is that there are so many examples that Danielle Smith and her version of the UCP act in bad faith. And you cannot act in good faith with somebody who's acting in bad faith. Because if somebody is constantly walking around with one hand behind their back because they're holding the knife that they're planning to put into yours, if you give them a big hug with both arms, it ends really badly for you. Devin Dreeshen acted in bad faith. Danielle Smith, on so many examples, has acted in bad faith. Multiple ministers and MLAs who have accepted gifts that a year ago would have been profound violations of the law, have ignored the ethical implications. They have acted in bad faith. And we hear the question all the time, what do we do about Danny? And the truth kind of sucks, to be honest with you. Because we've already seen that she's taking steps to do whatever she needs to do to consolidate her power. Because the forest fire season, because the wildfire season in this province is so out of control, she moved the election dates without any acknowledgement of the fact that the wildfire season is so out of control because of climate change. She moved the election dates back the better part of a year. From May to October. She gave herself a bonus half a year to be premier. This is something that she did not campaign on. It is something that she is doing. And if we take a look at the vast majority of the policies that Danielle Smith has announced or implemented since winning the last election, they're things that she didn't campaign on or she explicitly said she wasn't going to do. She's acting in bad faith. And it wouldn't be unreasonable to take a look at the timeline of all of these policies that she's bringing forward and wonder if she's acting in bad faith towards the UCP membership as well. Because she said that she's going to announce all of these policies right before her leadership review. Now, the fun thing about starting the conversation right before the leadership review is after the leadership review is done, she's set until the next election. Now, there are some people who are very optimistically trying to pursue the idea of recall. But the reality is that the type of infrastructure that's required in order to effectively recall a politician is massive. Jyoti Gondek has the lowest approval ratings in living memory of a mayor in Calgary. And even with that, even with political machines operating in the background, they couldn't get anywhere near the numbers they needed to recall the most disliked mayor in living memory. So it's possible that over the next 3 years, some of these recall things may actually recall a UCP politician or two or three. But the odds of it being enough to effectively end what Danny's doing to this province and the vulnerable in this province are incredibly low. And it sucks to hear, but it's the truth. Even Danielle Smith has said, oh, yeah, the recall legislation, they couldn't get Jyoti. The bar's too high. We should fix that. And she hasn't. Because again, Danielle Smith will say whatever is opportunistic in the moment, and then as soon as it actually comes time for the rubber to meet the road, she bails. So the odds of recall being changed, the recall legislation to be changed, to be able to make recall an actual viable choice is very, very low. And I know I'm going to get some comments on this, but there's only one window for anybody who wants to do anything about Danny. And that window is the leadership review. From the UCP's own website, what's involved in the leadership review vote? A leadership review is held at 1 out of every 3 AGMs in non-election years. This year, members registered for the AGM will vote by secret ballot on the question, do they approve of the current leader? With the answers yes or no. To vote, you must be a member by October 11th, 2024 deadline, register for the AGM, and attend in person. The fact that the last leadership review that the UCP had all kinds of mechanisms in place to ensure that as many people as wanted to could vote on Jason Kenney contrasts so starkly with this leadership review, some people would say should tell you a lot. Jason Kenney wanted to hold on to the leadership. There were a lot of people who wanted Jason Kenney gone. And because they wanted that vote to represent the most voices possible, they held that vote over an extended period of time where you could vote online. You had to mail in your ballot. You could mail in your ballot and you could vote via mailing your ballot and you could do all of those things. But if you take a look at the structure of this leadership review, it is as closed as it can possibly be. You have to be a member. It will only be in person. It will only be on one day. That is not the strategy of somebody who is confident. That is the strategy of somebody who's trying to manage their risk. And that should tell you that Danielle Smith is very much aware of the fact that her leadership is vulnerable. Going into this leadership vote, she's in trouble. And all of the steps that they're taking to make sure that her leadership has the best probability of surviving. And that means there's a very good chance that that's the only opportunity that Albertans will have to see a change in leadership with the UCP. And tickets aren't cheap. From now till the end of, September 30th. If you want the early bird with no meal, they're $169 plus the $10 for the membership. So you're looking at $180 plus you got to be in Lethbridge. If you wait longer, and they go up even more. And God help you if you want to be an observer, because those are $1,000. And as we learned 2 AGMs ago, they'll just revoke your ticket. They don't like us here. But that's the only window. That's the only shot. And the question that people should be asking themselves, and this is where I know we're going to get some messages on this. It's easy to go to a rally. It's easy to post online. It's easy to fire off an angry tweet. It's easier to rant to somebody who agrees with you. The question is, what is it worth doing to stopping Danielle Smith from punching down on vulnerable youth, from stepping into the doctor's offices across the province and dictating what physicians can treat with, what physicians can't treat with, telling parents that they cannot get care for their children What is worth doing? Now, I know there's a lot of people who listen to the show who don't have $180. And I'm not trying to shame anyone into, well, you didn't do enough. If you don't have the $180, you don't have $180, and that's okay because it's hard times in this province. But if you're someone who's listening to this episode or watching this episode and you do have the means, but you just don't want to, you need to think about that because she is coming for kids. She has said as much. She is coming to take away medical choice in this province. She has said that much. She is coming to take away parental choice in this province. She has said that much. This is not speculation. This is not hyperbole. This is public record. And I know one of the big counter arguments that a lot of people throw out there is, oh, but what if something worse happens? Sure. Possibility doesn't exist in things staying the same. Possibility exists in a vacuum. Of course, nature abhors a vacuum. Of course, there will be some of the worst elements of Albertans who will come forward to try to take over the leadership of the UCP. It's exactly what we saw happen with Danny. But there will also be the possibility that it could be somebody who isn't for sale. Somebody who doesn't believe that they're better than every other Albertan and they deserve to fly to Vancouver to sit in a skybox. Somebody who doesn't allow their ministers to accept tickets from organizations that have business in front of this government, which is a huge ethical violation, regardless of whether or not it's a violation of the law that they just changed. It could be somebody slightly less morally bankrupt. And that possibility is a possibility that I would argue is worth fighting for. So get your tickets. If you can, send a message. Because if you don't, if you have the means and you don't go there, you don't show up, you don't send that message, then the angry tweet that you wrote isn't going to help that kid when they're being outed to a homophobic parent. It's not. Now, in just a second, on that happy note, I do have a lighter clip before we open it up to the open mic section, but I gotta do the bill paying thing. So I'm gonna do all the plugs, and then we'll open it up to the open mic. I imagine there's probably some people who want to take a little bit of issue with what I just said there, and that's okay because we're okay with being called out here at the Breakdown. For legitimate reasons. Before I do, I got to say, if you are appreciating the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at the Breakdown, we do have a couple of FOIPs that we've put in. They're going to be fun. But if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at the Breakdown, then we would love it if you considered being one of our supporters at our Patreon site at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a cup of coffee a month, fancy cup of coffee a month, you can help us to continue to produce this content. So that's always the thing. But we know that there's some people, you don't want to do the long-term commitment. You're not into that. You're just looking for a one-time thing. That's okay too. We've got you covered because you can also transfer us at info@thebreakdownab.ca. All of this will be in the notes of the show, whether you're listening to the audio version or whether you're watching the video version on one of the many platforms that we're streaming on. Love to get your support there. And as well, we also do still have our merch up with the good folks at AB Poly, where you can get the hoodies, you can get the coffee cups. I enjoyed a coffee in my coffee cup this morning. You can also get the t-shirts, and you can get the toques, the beanies, the I think they're dope. You can get all of those at abpoly.ca, and the link for that will be in all of the text stuffs that accompany these episodes. So, all that being said, I do see that we do have somebody who is waiting in the queue. Good friend of the show, Tammy. What's going on tonight?
Let's see. Oh, yeah, it came up. Oh, I hear what you say, and I think, oh, yeah, it totally is exactly what my friends from Ontario and I think are going on. It's basically a game between Danny and Doug Ford, and it's like a hold my beer game, right? Doug does something disgusting, and then it's Danny going, hold my beer. I can do better than that.
Race
And
to the
it's back and
bottom.
forth. Yep, total race to the bottom. Now, you had brought up the thing about the water issue in Calgary and how the Alberta government had changed things so they can kind of take control of a municipal government, kind of do the things they want to do. You do realize that Danny got that, and right now, I'm sorry, but I'm kind of in U.S. politics land right now because of their upcoming election. But you do realize that if Danny was to do that, it would be totally on brand for her because that's a thing that the states, a lot of the states that have Black communities and their GOP run states, that's what they've literally done to a lot of Black communities. And they put in like a trustee to run the government, and without fail, those trustees are in the pocket of the GOP state government, like the upper level, and they're in the pocket and they're basically pulling the money out of those communities and to their buddies. So 100%, I could totally see Danny doing that because that is totally on brand for Danielle Smith. From Danny just being crooked as crooked can be, plus being a devotee of everything in the US, especially everything GOP in the US, that would be totally on brand for the UCP government.
Oh, I totally agree. And I think that
Okay.
if she does decide to, speaking for myself, I think that if she does decide to go that route, which would not surprise me. And again, like one of the things I've had conversations with a couple of people who are heavily involved in municipal politics this week, including one city councilor. And I was just like, how did you not see this coming? Like there are no rules anymore. You have to understand that. And if you're not dealing with Danielle Smith with the expectation that there are no rules anymore, then you're going to be surprised every single time. And the bottom line is that there are heavy UCP donors who are established heavy connections to the current iteration of the UCP that have projects that they want to see come to fruition because they've got a vested interest in it. Jim Gray has the Seton development with Brookfield. Adam Waterous has the train to Banff. Adam wants that project so bad that they came forward and they said, hey, we'll pay for the whole train track stuff if you guys just build a station in Calgary. That's how much money that they stand to make from this stuff. And so, of course, the goalposts will be moved.
Of course, absolutely. And the worst thing about all of this is that we know for a fact that a lot of our UCP, and I say our just because they're part of the government right now, they've all got ties to the GOP and all the bullshit that goes on down there and all the it's just maddening. It's like we are not the USA. We don't want to be the USA, but Danielle Smith is bloody determined to turn Alberta into It wouldn't even be a state because we know they wouldn't make it a state. They'd make it whatever kind of protectorate it is. And then Albertans wouldn't even get a vote. Like, that's the worst thing about the idiocy amongst the people that want to see Alberta join the states is they don't seem to understand that they would not be made a state. They would be made a protectorate or whatever they call it when you're not a state. And all that means is that you get one vote, you get like one person and that's it. And you've got no say. And then the US would basically take all the oil, all the everything. They just take it. Would not be ours anymore. It would be theirs. And they don't, the stupidity of these people. And I'm sorry, I was raised around them. I just lost one of my best friends, a friend that I've had since grade 1. Her mother saw me in class and she looked at Nikki and she said, "You want to be friends with that girl because she's really smart and she's going to help you." And I did, like, education wise, like I was the smart kid because I'm autistic and I had special interests that keep me doing things that, like, Nick's mom recognized that. And it was really helpful for me because it gave me a normal person that was a normal person that treated me like I was just a friend rather than a crazy weird kid. But the sad thing is she's gone down the anti-trans route. And I gave her a ration online and I blocked her. Because that's one thing that I'm sorry, if you're going to go down the route of the stupidity and this is the thing, Nate, that makes me want to leave Alberta. Because when someone that I've known my entire life, I started school in grade 1 at age 5, not at age 6 like most kids do, at age 5, because of the day I was, like, my birth date. It basically let them put me in school a year early, a year younger. And because there was no preschool and no kindergarten back then, and my mom was running the farm basically on her own, for her, that was a great thing to get me out of the house a year early, like younger. I know it sounds horrible, but when you're running a farm, because my dad at the time wasn't at home, he was working out on the rigs. He was not there. So my mom was running the farm on her own. So getting the kid out of the house a year early was a great thing. But that's the year, like, I've known this girl, I'm 54. I've known this girl most of my life. And she went down someplace, and the way she went down it was so, it's the thing that I hate the most when people go, "Well, there's XX and XY, and there's a man and there's a woman, and there's nothing else." And I'm like, that's so intellectually just wrong. If you know about genetics, that's not how genetics works.
Yeah.
Right? And beyond the fact that they're treating people like crap that don't deserve it, they're intellectually lazy. And I'm sorry, that's an autistic thing. We can't stand when people tell lies that you can prove are, like, you can just lay out in a book.
No,
It's a lot.
I feel you on that one. And you know what? I think this is part of the reason why, when we were going through the what are we going to talk about this week things, we wanted to make sure that the sex ed piece was one that we talked about, because if you choose to operate on an understanding of things from the 1950s, then some of those you can uncomfortably make sense of some of those arguments, but the reality is that we have learned so much more since that period of time. And there's a great video. My wife was showing me this video last night where, and this is one of the things that I wish more people were comfortable with, where there was, I think it was Piers Morgan was arguing with a biologist, and the biologist was just like, they were talking about the Big Bang and the before the Big Bang and how you can't say before the Big Bang because time wasn't the thing, and so it's a whole thing. And Piers Morgan was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And he was like, yeah, that's because you don't get it. You can't understand it because you're not a quantum physicist. I can't understand it because I'm not a quantum physicist. So I'm okay with that, because there are
Yeah.
some people who know some things better and have the capacity to understand things in ways that I just don't. And I think it's a sign of intellectual honesty when you're able to say, you know what? I don't need to know the math behind a nuclear reactor works. I don't need to. I just
No.
there are people who are smarter than me about that thing. Uh, and so I'm going to just go, I don't know, man. The smart guy knows. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with doing that. But what we have created is an ecosystem where if you say, I don't know, man, there's a smart guy who knows the answer to that question, somehow people feel diminished. And it's not that.
No.
It's
And as like I've always kind of been a science fictiony kind of person, so I have absolutely no problem with dealing with the idea of something that happened before the Big Bang, because it's when you write science fiction or you read science fiction, even though it doesn't exist, that's about thinking about different possibilities, right? So if they can mathematically or scientifically say they're through a quantum level, this is something that we think or we know. Because I mean, sometimes science isn't what they know, it's what they suspect is going on
yes.
first, right? Because they see evidence of it, but they can't yet prove it. They just see evidence. So they think this is how it works. And then over time, they get more evidence and it firms things up. And it's just like the genetics thing, like you said. 50 years ago, we knew XX and XY, and that's what we knew. Well, now we understand more.
100%. Like, and this is the thing, like, if we don't accept that our knowledge base is going to grow, then we'd still be treating people with leeches, which we do for some things because it works for some things, but we don't use it for everything anymore.
Exactly. Exactly. But yeah, so it's like, and honestly, one of the things that I've seen, and again, we're Alberta based, but it's one of the things that I've noticed in the US election. It literally is how they're defining it right now. And I think it qualifies for Alberta too. Is, are we going to move forward with an understanding that includes everyone and all of the ideas? Or are we going to try to stay back in the 1950s?
Exactly. I gotta share this is fantastic from Plain Power right here. Barbers are no longer dentists and medicine practitioners. I mean, there's so many different examples, and I think it's okay if there's areas like acknowledging your limitations on knowing the things is not a bad thing. I have two vehicles. I have my silly car and I have my practical vehicle. My silly car is an 82 LeBaron. And I got it because it's a vehicle that has no computer stuffs, so I can work on it and I can learn how to do the things. When my real vehicle, which is a Toyota, has problems, I take it to a mechanic because it has computer stuffs and I'll ruin it. And it's
Yep.
okay to recognize that I can work on an 82 LeBaron and not screw it up too badly. But if I try to work on the 2008, I will create more problems for myself than good. So I totally hear what you're saying. Anything else you want to throw into the mix there, Tammy?
No, that was it. You have a great night.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for tapping in. I want to say the chat is doing great. So great tonight. I see we have a shout out to a couple of new people. Hey there, DK Gray. Thanks for tapping in. We have a lovely little community over here. You should come back. And that's it for tonight, folks. I want to say a big thank you again, obviously, to everybody in the chat. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who listened in on the Twitter Spaces. Extra big thank you to Tammy for coming in and sharing her thoughts as well. And if you like what we're doing, patreon.com/thebreakdownab. And if you don't like what we're doing, let us know. If we get something demonstrably wrong, let us know. We're all learning here. And if we get something wrong, we'd much rather correct ourselves and be right than double down and continue to be wrong, because that's no fun at all. So all of that being said, I promised I would leave on a happy note. And I realized this week as we were putting together the show, we had let something fall to the wayside. So we're bringing that back just before we wrap things up, because it always makes me smile.
I tend to be pretty trusting.
It's the second nod. I say that every time that I play that video. But that second nod, man, it just gets it for me. That's it for this week. We will be back next Sunday. We are lining up a bunch of interviews on the education system and the fallout of going back to school. We're going to have conversations about curriculum. We're going to have conversations about the state of the classroom. And then we're going to be moving probably to the healthcare system, because I hear things are going fantastic over there. So lots to talk about. We will see you next Sunday, which will be the 13th or something like that. Next Sunday, same time, 8:00. And in the meantime, and in between time, keep the conversation going.